Time next for business news on the program with Kate Moody. Good evening, Kate. You're starting out with the closing bell on Wall Street.
Yeah, lots of movement there, Delano, as we kick off the month of November. U.S. stocks have made up some of the worst losses from last week's sell-off. The Dow Jones closed up over 400 points, about 1.6%. The S&P 500 was up about 1.25%. The Nasdaq closer to the flat line, but still up 0.4% at the closing bell. Surveys showing that manufacturing activity across the U.S. really picked up for the month of October. Investors are now going to be in something of a holding pattern as U.S. election day kicks off. We may not have the results of the presidential race for several days. So Wall Street and the rest of the world, of course, will really be waiting for clarity there. Broadly speaking, Donald Trump's pro-business stance is something that could probably boost the markets, at least in the short term, if he's reelected. What investors really don't want is a long, protracted, drawn-out dispute over the results. There could be a lot of market volatility if that is the case. It would also delay, of course, any efforts to try to reach a deal on a further round of financial stimulus to help the American families and businesses who are struggling to deal with the pandemic. Earlier, we saw the major European indices closing higher, gains of about 2% in Paris, Frankfurt, and Milan, closer to 1% in London. We saw strong manufacturing activity in the Eurozone as well, boosting trade, but stocks across the globe really turning their attention to Washington and bracing for the election there.
Clearly the election on everybody's minds. Now, in addition to the presidential and congressional races, voters in California will be weighing in on the future of the gig economy. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, they're going to be voting on what's called Proposition 22, which is to uphold or perhaps overturn a law that was passed last year, which requires gig economy workers to be treated as employees. If this referendum is approved, it would exempt major platforms from that law. Now, what this really comes down to is the employment status of drivers and delivery workers. Are they employees of Uber, Lyft, or Deliveroo, or are they self-employed independent contractors? Should they be guaranteed a minimum wage with paid time off and employer contributions towards health insurance, or should they be just treated as independent and self-employed? Now, these are questions that are being asked in cities across the globe, and this California referendum could set a precedent not just for the 500,000 gig economy workers in that state, but for the millions more across the United States. There have been protests on both sides of this issue, even workers themselves somewhat divided. Most of them argue that they should be receiving the same benefits and protections as full-time employees. Others say they like the flexibility of being able to juggle different occupations or gigs, and they're worried about losing their jobs. Now, the apps themselves have argued that it'll be too expensive for them to take on millions of new employees. They say they may have to cut back their services altogether if this referendum is not passed. It is one of the most expensive ballot measures in California's history. Over $200 million has already been spent on lobbying on both sides.
Kate, thank you very much for the update. Kate Moody there with today's business news. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us, more coming up. This is France 24.